So much of the emphasis on our learning is about how it's going to get you a better job. I'm afraid that we lose something when we forget that learning is fun, damn it, and it can be a source of tremendous pleasure, and God knows we could use some more pleasure in our lives.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. So, they say that knowledge is power, but what happens when that power is controlled by institutions that prioritize conformity over curiosity? Today's guest decided to find out by becoming what he calls a guerrilla scholar, someone who pursues rigorous academic work completely outside traditional academic structures. Dr. Sheldon Greaves has turned intellectual independence into both an art and a science, and his new handbook is igniting a movement of citizen scholars recovering academics and what he lovingly calls his intellectual ne'er-do-wells. This is Authors on Mission podcast, and we're going to have a great conversation about when brilliant minds refuse to be contained. Sheldon, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course, I'm looking forward to it. I think you have a lot to bring to the table, especially about, nonconformity and exploring what's out there, learning more. I love it. So before we dive in, though, I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about yourself. So, you describe yourself as having an eccentric career path. Can you walk us
Mhm.
through how you went from writing in Silicon Valley to building a university to publishing your books? How did that all come to be?
Yeah, I completed a PhD from UC Berkeley in ancient Near Eastern studies, which is just about as marketable as it sounds. Um, and I did what any humanities major in Silicon Valley was doing at that time. I hung my shingle out as a technical writer, which gave me some experience in the computer industry, and I got to see the corporate world up close. I'd actually been working part-time in that area quite a bit during the course of my degree. Um, Actually, my wife and I were both working on our PhDs at the same time, so we were kind of putting each other through college, so to speak. And we succeeded. We both finished, and we're still friends. Um, but after I graduated, I kind of realized that academia was really not suitable for me because my interests tend to be very broad. They're very eccentric. Um, and I just kind of like to follow my own bent. So shortly after I graduated, about a year afterwards, actually, by a very strange chain of events, I was recruited by a couple of people to help found a new university, which was designed from the ground up to cater to the intelligence, counterterrorism, and executive protection fields. And this was something that had never been done before. We actually we broke some new ground there. But essentially, for the next few years, I was literally training spies, uh, which was a lot of fun because these people are very interesting. They have great stories, and they tend to be very smart and dedicated. And it was just a marvelous experience. Along the way, I also spent some time in the nonprofit sector with a couple of, with one organization in particular that was promoting science education and science literacy. I worked with them doing project management, producing their newsletter, and so forth. And then until the university heated up, and I went to work for them. After a while, though, the university got hit by the stock market crash in 2008, and I got laid off from my own university, which was kind of a bummer. But among other things, it gave me the opportunity to kind of look around at some other things. I did some more work in the nonprofit sector. I ended up creating a 50-part podcast series on the Old Testament, which was kind of my academic major. Did a lot of adult education for some local educational groups. I also got involved in a project with some other amateur scientists. We were working to design and build the first amateur rocket that was designed to actually go into outer space. We didn't actually get the rocket off the ground, but we did get a license from the FAA to do it. So that was pretty cool. Learned a lot doing that. And more recently, I've been working as a substitute teacher for the local school district, also as an educational assistant, and I've kind of been getting an up close and personal look at how K through 12 education is happening, at least here in Oregon, where I live. Um, and so, yeah, I tend to bounce around a lot, and it's been interesting and it's been fun, and I'm kind of glad I took the leap.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely off the beaten path, and but really
Mhm.
cool. It's interesting. Growing up, I never really thought about academia aside outside of institutions, right? But I think it's a very unique perspective, and if it fits you and that's what you need, and you need to kind of just learn without any structure, then that's exactly what you're looking for. And I guess that's kind of why you
Mhm.
created the Guerrilla Scholars Handbook.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first off, do you happen to have a copy of it with you today, by any chance?
I do. This is the book.
Okay.
Whoops, there we go.
Nice simplistic
It is a
design. What do we
mhm.
have on the back there?
On the back is a little blurb. I will read it to you. It says, "How to join the ranks of independent scholars, citizen scientists, recovering academics, makers, artists, activists, and other intellectual ne'er-do-wells pursuing a life of the mind and changing the world."
Yeah, and that's
So
that
this,
quote I mentioned earlier. There do.
yes, ne'er-do-wells, yes. It came out in June, late June, so it hasn't been out for very long, but so far the reception has been quite positive, and I'm encouraged by that. It is also available in hardback, softcover, ebook, and audiobook.
Okay, lots of different
Amazon, of
mediums.
course, has it, and yeah. So,
Good. Yeah, so many different ways for people to,
mhm.
get it, listen to the information, or read the information, and be immersed. So that being said, I did look through it a little bit, and you open with this statement, "It's a pleasure to learn." So, why do you think this needs to be said in
Mhm.
2025? I mean, do you think people is that a jarring statement to people to know that it's a pleasure to learn?
Yeah, I think the reason I put that up front so prominently is because so much of the emphasis on our learning is about how it's going to get you a better job, or
Mm.
if you're in a K through 12 class, how you're going to pass the standardized test, which you will then never have to take again as long as you live. There's a The idea of learning for its own sake has gotten lost somehow in the struggle. It's
Right.
always about what's practical and what's going to make you a lot of money, or at least help you pay off the student loans that you're going to be taking out, and that sort of thing. And I'm afraid that we lose something when we forget that learning is fun, damn it. And it can be a source of tremendous pleasure, and God knows we could use some more pleasure in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's about mindset too, then, right? Just having that
Hmm.
mindset of wanting to learn and wanting to improve yourself.
Hmm.
I think there's a
Yeah,
lot of people out there say, I don't know it. And then that's that, right? But, we
yeah,
could just kind of take initiative.
right. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, you kind of go even more. I mean, Guerrilla Scholarship, what does that mean, for example? And how does it differ from traditional academic research? What do you think?
Okay, well, it tends to basically it's using creativity and unconventional approaches to finding things out,
Mm.
to learning and working with information. It tends to ignore disciplinary boundaries. It doesn't like specialization too much, and uh, it tends to offer people a way to look at certain areas of study that um, is often ignored by academics, not out of any kind of malice or anything. It's simply the way academic research is structured. Uh, you, to put it very simply, there are two things that control academic research. One is funding, and the other is what your discipline is. And if you go into, say, academia, say as a historian, you get in a very narrow lane and you stay there. And if you tend to get interested in something outside that lane, well, then you're going to, oh, oh, oh,
Oh, there's the
uh,
cat.
yes, this is Cassandra.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. To
okay,
our audience, we were ready for Cassandra to pay us a visit at some point.
yeah, okay. Well, I was kind of expecting one of the others because she's a shy one, but
Oh.
um, anyway, uh, there's this idea that you need to stay in your lane, and also you have to get funding to do your research. And if you find yourself with a line of research that goes outside what the funding allows, you're not allowed to go there.
Mm,
You don't have those constraints with Guerrilla Scholarship. You
okay.
can pretty much follow it wherever you want. There was a historian in the mid to late 20th century. Her name was Barbara Tuckman, and she was a fantastic writer. She wrote a number of excellent historical books that she could never have written if she had been associated with a university. So she wrote one book on Europe in the 14th century. She wrote another book on the factors that led to the outbreak of World War One.
Mm,
She wrote another very good book on the founding of the modern state of Israel, and yet another book on the aftermath of the American Revolution as the United States as an emerging world power. There's no way that a history department would have allowed her so much latitude. They would have said, you stick with one thing and that's where you are, and you're not allowed to go outside of that. In fact, in my book, I talked about a professor of mine who was hired to teach history of Central Asia and the Uzbek language, which he did. But he also found himself getting interested in some other things having to do with aviation history, of all things. And eventually, because of that, he was forced to take early retirement. The interesting thing, though, was that his aviation research turned out to be massively significant and constituted a really big contribution to the field. So go figure.
yeah.
So Guerrilla Scholar doesn't have that problem. And the other thing, too, is that Guerrilla Scholarship tends to be very local. So if you're doing something at a university, you research something, you figure out something, the path from the university to a public impact can be pretty long. In fact, it may not get there at all. It might be really obscure, or it might have to go through some kind of corporation or something like that. With Guerrilla Scholarship, that path is a lot shorter. If it's something that has an impact on the local on your local scene, it's very easy to get there because there are lots of ways now that we can share what we learn and share what we do.
Understood. Yeah, well, I can see it really opens a ton of different doors, ones that, wouldn't be there otherwise. And I'm glad that you wrote the book about it to really spread
Mhm.
the word. And I'd like to use this as an opportunity to transition into the writing aspect of it all. I mean, you say that writing is a way of thinking. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering if that applied as you were writing your book itself. And if you can just tell us a little bit more about how writing shapes your intellectual development.
Absolutely. In fact, I I got into the habit a long time ago of writing in a journal every day. And I write in longhand because handwritten notes tend to stick in the mind better than typed or dictated notes. And I would just write about things that I was coming across, stuff I was reading, things in the news, things people were talking about, what someone had told me about something or other. And the process of writing is a great way to kind of noodle over something. Very often I'll have the experience of when I'm writing, an idea will come to me and I'll start writing it, and it's almost as though I'm an outsider looking on as this idea starts to flow onto the page. It's a really wild experience, but sometimes that's when some of my better ideas come to me.
Mm.
Now, what I do after that, once I fill a volume of a journal, I'll set it aside for a while, a few months maybe, sometimes longer. And then I'll go back through it and read it. And every once in a while, I'll come across something that goes, "Hey, that was a great idea. That was a pretty cool idea. That was an interesting thought." And I'll write that onto a 3x5 card. And I now have this pretty large stack of 3x5 cards. Any one of the things on those cards could become a paragraph in a book. It could become a podcast, maybe an article, a presentation, even another book. Um, but it's just a way of taking what goes on in your head and sifting it out, finding the good stuff. It's also a good way to keep me honest, so I don't say, "Oh, I've always thought that," and then I go back and say, "Oh, no, you didn't," you know.
Right.
So it's kind of a nice regulating bullshit detector, for me at least.
I like that line, a bullshit detector.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. You always have a track record of it, and it just helps you better flesh out your mind, which is it's
Mhm.
wonderful. Now, as you dove into this book, I'm wondering, did you have a certain planning process in mind? I mean, of course, you had to research and fact check something that you didn't know, maybe, but what exactly was the process like for you? Especially because you didn't have
Um,
institutional access, right? So,
right, yeah. I mean, some of it grew out of my experience when I was in academia, but it was because I was doing it on a shoestring. I didn't always well, see, I mentioned before that my wife and I were both working on our doctorates. And it got to where what would happen is I would take a financial leave of absence and get a job and work for a year, and she would study. And then the next year, she would get a job and I would study. And we'd kind of swap back and forth. But the thing was, when I wasn't studying, I still had to keep up on my field.
mm,
And I still had to, be, keeping sharp and finding out what was current. And I didn't have access to the library at that time, at least not generally. Um, so I had to find other ways to do that. Basically, developing a network, talking to people who did have access, and say, "Hey, could you send me a copy of this paper that just came out?" Or things of that sort. It also kind of gave me an appreciation for just doing things on the cheap, uh, which most graduate students learn how to do anyway. But yeah, it was just kind of this interesting way of it turned into almost like a life path
mm,
in a sense, because I discovered that doing intellectual work this way is kind of fun, and there's a challenge to it. It becomes a little bit more like a game, and as I said before, you have a certain amount of freedom to sort of follow your bent, which doesn't always comply with what you're expected to do.
understood. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So I'm glad you kind of found a workaround around that all, and that it became a process for you, and perhaps
Mhm.
also an example for how, moving forward for anybody else, they can also do the same things,
Mhm.
if need be.
Yeah.
Now, you have this book out, but of course, the mission continues. You have a bunch of current work kind of flying out there. A Substack, for example, I was kind of looking through it a little bit. One of your
Mhm.
more recent ones, Saving Our Common History, kind of applies the Guerrilla Scholarship to current events. So I'm wondering if you want to maybe chat about that for a little bit and tell our
Right.
readers about it, because maybe they would be interested in reading a little bit more and looking at some of your other Substack articles.
Yeah, I do have Substack. It's called The Guerrilla Scholar,
Mhm.
and the post that you're referring to is one that I just posted about a week ago, a little over a week ago, and it concerns a video by Heather Cox Richardson, who is a historian, and she's been uh, posting a lot of wonderful stuff on the history behind our present moment. And she also has been very vocal in calling out um, things like book bans and fights over school curricula and the pearl clutching over critical race theory and the attacks by the Trump regime on universities,
Mm.
trying to get them to basically shake them down and getting them to change their curricula and classes and various other things of that sort.
Mm.
And I posted about that because I think that it's an important thing for us to keep in mind. The thing is, we have to ask ourselves, why do we bother? Why do we bother with school at all? Why do we bother with education? The thing is, our public schools are where we create the public.
True.
And, which is kind of an odd way to think about it, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, you've probably heard the term military industrial complex, right? You've heard that
Perhaps.
maybe. Okay.
Perhaps give us a little bit of an overview real fast.
Okay, yeah, it's been around for a while. It was taken from a speech by President Dwight Eisenhower when he left office,
Mhm.
warning that corporate and military interests were in a could kind of take over, so to speak, or at least dominate
Mhm.
political and intellectual life in the country, which in fact has kind of turned out to be true. And he said in the speech that the solution to the one safeguard, is what he called an alert and knowledgeable citizenry.
Mm.
And to that end, he also he signed into law something called the Defense and Education Act, which just poured out funding like water for public education in universities. And it was a marvelously foresighted piece of legislation that just made a huge difference. But the thing is, we look at the liberal arts, for example, and in this case, liberal doesn't mean what it means today politically. It doesn't refer to a particular band of the political spectrum. It refers to, well, it's related to the word liberty. It's the education of a free person. And the liberal arts embody within them the tools of competent citizenship and effective politics. So being able to speak well, to write well, to argue cogently, to know your history, know how you got here. So when someone is, you're at a school board meeting and someone gets up and starts spouting some kind of nonsense, there are people there who can stand up and say, no, that's not the way it is. This is how it should be. And they can do so in a way that is clear and powerful and persuasive. I don't know if you remember the shooting, the school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School a number of years ago. After that particular shooting, the kids at that school started showing up on TV and in various interviewing venues, and people were shocked at how smart and articulate and how logical and persuasive they were. And
Mm.
the gun lobby kind of took a serious hit because these kids were articulating their positions so well. It got to the point, in fact, that people were saying, "Oh, those they can't possibly be high school kids. They've got to be actors." No, they
Mm.
were high school kids who had received a really good liberal arts education. and
Wow.
and
That's so
that's
beautiful.
that's the thing. It's the good citizen speaking well. And um, we've kind of gotten away from that. Guerrilla scholarship is not necessarily all about that, but it's definitely a part of it.
Understood. Well, thank you for giving us an overview of that. And to all of our listeners who are interested in learning a little bit more, that there's a whole
Mhm.
Substack that he's created, and what's the best link for them to find it?
Oh, the best link would be, let's see, it's Guerrilla Scholar, and that's with two R's and two L's, .substack.com.
Perfect.
and
Okay.
that
I
should
always
get
like
you
to
there.
ask so that people can go ahead and click on it. We're going to put it in the description box also. And
Hmm.
of course, also the link to your book as well, so that everybody can go ahead
Hmm.
and learn a little bit more. Now, as we begin to wrap up today, I'm wondering if you have any last bits of advice that you'd like to offer the authors listening today. Anything that you wish you knew when you first got it started, when you began dabbling in the writing world. What do you think?
For people who are just kind of getting into the whole thing of research and doing things outside of academia, this is going to sound kind of not terribly profound, but I urge you to go to your public library and have a good long chat with the reference librarian.
Wow.
They are magicians. They are aware of things that you have no idea even existed. Uh, you know, we go to Google. Yeah, Google is nice. It's fine. It has its weaknesses and its strengths, and I talk about those in the book. But if you really want to uh, dig deep and find stuff that maybe nobody else knows, start with your local reference librarian and get to know him or her on a first name basis just as a start. The other thing I would say is write every day something. uh, the bit about a journal, probably the best intellectual habit I've ever acquired.
Right. No, that's a really unique piece of advice. I like that, go to the library, talk to somebody. We always hear um, pieces of advice like talk to an editor or a publishing company, not like a reference librarian. I like that a lot because you're right, they
Yeah.
know it all, don't they?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Google does not have it all, not even close. So.
Well, there you go. I love it. Sheldon, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. This has been such an insightful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Danielle. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. And to all of our listeners today, if the conversation sparked something in you, that desire to learn for the joy of it, then head to the links in the description box, learn a little bit more about the Guerrilla Scholars Handbook, and of course, Sheldon's Substack, everything in between. So yeah, in the meantime, everyone, just keep questioning, keep learning, and remember that the most important revolutions start with the mind of the person who dares to think differently. And with that, have a great day, everybody.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.